All right, it is 6:05.
Okay, thanks for coming, everyone. Glad you could spend a little bit of your Friday evening with us. I'd like to introduce our presenter. Justin Lowe is a former campaign and legislative staffer who has worked at the local and state levels, most recently with State Representative Dacia Graber of House District 35. Dacia is my rep. In addition to campaign and legislative work, Justin is passionate about criminal justice reform and currently serves on the City of Tigard Public Safety Advisory Board and is a full-time student at USC, earning his master's degree in criminal justice. Justin, it's all yours. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for spending a bit of your Friday evening with us. And Diane, thank you for the invitation and the introduction to present to y'all tonight. As she mentioned, my name is Justin. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm going to apologize in advance. I am definitely operating on a Friday schedule and Friday brain right now, as some of you might too. So we will work through this process together in terms of talking about what it's like to run a campaign for the first time and successfully. And this will be very conversational throughout the presentation. So if you have questions as I'm working through all the topics that I'm sure you all were drawn to in the flyer, feel free to either unmute, raise your hand. We can be very casual about this. And I just want to make sure that I'm a resource for you today. There are other campaign managers and folks who have done this for so much longer and have ran larger campaigns than I have. But my goal here is to make this accessible for you all, especially if you don't have time to or money to attend one of the candidate schools or don't have the capacity to. And so hopefully what you hear from today can answer some of the burning questions you have about running and help you on your journey, either for this May or in a future election if you decide to run. Just to get a quick show of hands, who here is running this May by chance? All right, all of you, wonderful. Okay, so I will bear that in mind as I work through this. And how many of you are enrolled in a formal candidate school or have attended a session already through another organization? No one. Okay, great. That is wonderful to know. So that way I won't feel like I'm repeating anything that you might have already heard. And I've been requested to make this as linear as possible. So I'm going to start from the very beginning. I know that you all are confirmed to run for May, but since we're recording this, I want folks who view this later to see what the process is like all the way from start to finish. And so the first thing that I want to talk with you all, which I'm sure you have already done, is knowing the position that you're running for. Real quick, if anyone wants to come off of mute, does anyone want to share the position that they're running for right now and maybe a little bit about that position based off of your understanding and research?
I'll go. Beaverton City Council here. And what was the second part of the question? What? And
just what you're familiar with already in terms of what the position does or entails.
I ran for it once more. So I've been in this world a little bit more, maybe than a first-time candidate, but very familiar. I ton of boards and experiences, community boards, city budget committee. So I know all the counselors. I work with them on a close basis. So pretty eye-opening, the amount of work for the amount of pay, but you know, it's kind of the thing we do, right?
That's true, John. I've heard that comment made multiple times from multiple folks regarding amount of work versus the amount of compensation for positions like this, but definitely a wonderful opportunity. So John touched on some really important things that he's already experienced and some things that are relevant to this topic, which is that he has served on some boards and gotten to know the city councilors and whatnot. And one of the very first things that I'd recommend to folks when they're doing their research is to either find a way to get involved in the entity, organization, board, council, or even down in Salem, like in some fashion or form, get involved in that process. So my former boss, Representative Dacia Graber, before she decided to run, the way she did her research was she started out just testifying down in Salem on bills that she was passionate about and interested in that were related to her field of work. And eventually she started having conversations with her former state representative that she replaced, Representative Margaret Doherty. And right then and there, I would highly recommend that if you have the opportunity to have a conversation, a coffee, or a virtual meeting with someone who's in the position that you want to run for, or if they're an incumbent that you're challenging. I know some folks on here are challenging incumbents and or also from the other party. By all means, reach out to another individual who might serve in the same capacity. So say on Beaverton City Council, if there's someone who doesn't necessarily represent your ideas, or if you're challenging them and they're an incumbent, maybe have an opportunity to have a sit down with another council member, or say another state rep or another school board member. Most of these folks, I'm sure you can anticipate, they have loaded calendars, much like ourselves. Everyone here on this Zoom, I'm sure, wears multiple hats in their daily lives, but they're usually open to being able to pass down their knowledge and to talk about themselves and their experience. I mean, politicians, they love having conversations about themselves and their experiences and sharing it with folks. So make sure to take advantage of that. The other thing that I would recommend is that if you can start attending the meetings, public hearings, whatever that's related to that position, so that way you can get a firm understanding of some of the policies and issues that are currently facing that elected position that you're running for. By all means, do that. I strongly recommend that. I first started out as a campaign manager for Ben Bowman, who is currently the chair of Tiger-Tualatin School Board. And prior to him running, he attended 2 years worth of school board meetings. And I think he only missed maybe a handful of them. Like, you can count them on one hand. And then when I got on board to help him in his campaign, I attended for about 8 months straight. So that way I had a firm understanding too. Now, most folks won't have the time and capacity to do that and have the commitment to do that. But if you can attend maybe 50% or even 25%, or even go back into the public record and look at videos to get a sense of what that position is responsible for and what issues constituents are bringing to them, that is a phenomenal way to start building out the platform that you can run on, what you'll talk about if you decide to campaign, and how you want to position yourself as a candidate, especially if you're running against an incumbent or someone else. And so all of those ideas are ways that you can start to be familiar with the position and start researching for it. I know that within the flyer, there's a question that is posed that I think is a phenomenal question. I'm sure you all have already had conversations with your family, significant others, or partners about, can you make the time to do this? I'm sure you've also posed this in terms of comparing it to the job that you're currently working or any other responsibilities and obligations that you have. I think that every person who runs for a position should ask themselves this, because running a campaign, not even doing the position yet, but running a campaign can be very time consuming. It can be strenuous on the brain and the heart at periods of times. I know that I have had my fair share of tears on the campaign trail. And if you ask candidates, they definitely have had those too, whether it's to themselves or to their partners, or maybe even to friends at work or their boss. And it's hard. It's a strenuous process with a great reward at the end. But I can tell you right now, for example, Representative Graber, she was working about, I want to say, 55 to 60 hours at one point during the campaign trail, because she's a paramedic and firefighter, and she's working 24-hour shifts at a time. She would take 4-hour naps when she got home, and then she'd pop on call with me to then start doing campaign interviews, call time for fundraising, and it was a grind. And for some positions, they will require a huge amount of commitment and a huge amount of time. And for others, maybe not so much. It depends on the nature of the position. It depends on how many other folks are running for it. And if you're facing an uphill climb like an incumbent. And so definitely ask that question to yourself and have those conversations with the folks around you, and make sure that you lean on them, because they'll be your support, but also be mindful that this is something that you might be bringing into that space with your friends and family. And so having that conversation with them can be very grounding and important before starting this journey. I'm going to look at my notes here real quick because I need to figure out what to offer next in terms of making this linear. So after you've done your research and say that you have made the commitment to running for a position, there are a handful of important steps that you could choose from, but I'm going to address filing for candidacy first. This might not necessarily be the next step that you take, because you're still having conversations with your kitchen cabinet. And a kitchen cabinet, for those of you who don't know, are the people who you bring in for weekly or bi-weekly meetings that are supporting your campaign. They could be volunteers, they could be close confidants or friends, people who you know are just very politically inclined and like to talk politics, that are supporting you and will maybe, if in a post-COVID time, we'll actually be in your kitchen and have meetings. I know Diane had the opportunity to sit on some kitchen cabinet meetings and serve the entire campaign with Rep. Graber. But filing for candidacy, this can be overwhelming. I'm going to try to break it down as easy as possible. The first thing that you're going to do is go to the Secretary of State website. And you're going to go to, I think it's elections and voting. There's a tab there up at the top, and then you can find a bar that says the current election. And when you click on it, there will be some links that show PDFs that are step-by-step guides on how to run if you would like to run for this election. And for statewide partisan and statewide nonpartisan positions, it's very important. I mean, honestly, any position, it's important to get the deadlines down. And I've got them right here. I'm sure you all have them too, since you've already made the decision to run. But March 10, 2022 is the deadline to file for candidacy in the primary. And then August 30th, 2022 is the deadline for the general election. And I cannot stress enough that if you have a campaign calendar somewhere that you're sharing with your kitchen cabinet, your team, your campaign manager, make sure those dates are on there, because even if you've already done it, even if you've filed, it's still important to have those on there. Those are also the deadlines, I believe, for the voter pamphlet statement. And so it's important that you have those marked down and that you're watching those, because filing for candidacy and the voter pamphlet statement are two very important deadlines that you don't want to miss. If you're running for a statewide partisan or nonpartisan position, you're going to file for candidacy through the Secretary of State's online system called ORSTAR. You can also file through paper, but I highly recommend doing it online. If you're running for a county position, so auditor, clerk, commissioner, or even PCP, you're going to file with your county election official. Now, you can find that information on the Secretary of State website as well, but a more direct route could be just looking up your actual county and then navigating to the elections page from there. And they should have all the documents that you need to fill out. And I promise you, most of them have step-by-step one-pagers on how to properly file online or in person, and everything you need to fill out. I'm not going to go through those steps because that's way too nuanced, but definitely check those out. And then if you're running for city office, like John is, John, I don't know if you've filed yet or not, if you've gone through the process, but my understanding is that there are city elections officials that you could file through at the local level. You could still get the forms from the Secretary of State website, but you're only filing at the city level.
Yeah, you're correct. At least in Beaverton, the city recorder's office on the fourth floor of City Hall is where you get the paperwork. And I don't know about other jurisdictions too. Beaverton makes it really easy. You only have to get 10 signatures, no less than 10 and no more than 20 signatures to appear on the ballot. So I think every jurisdiction might be a little different for local elections, but
right. They definitely have their own schedules on fees or petitions. John actually brought up a really great point that I had completely forgotten about. When you're filing for candidacy, you can file in two ways. You can file through petition, and that's through collecting signatures from folks, and you'd have to look at your local guidelines or on the Secretary of State website based on the position you're running for on how many signatures that you need to collect to file for free. Or if you don't have the time and capacity or volunteer power to do that, what most folks do just to be safe is they end up paying the fee to file for candidacy. I don't have the dollar cost on it. You can find that in the forms to file. But here's my recommendation on those, because I know that that's actually a pretty good question that I'm sure some folks have thought about and others have asked before. I have always recommended to my candidates that if they already have the funds and they have the financial ability to do so, I say file by paying the fee. And that's because it's less stress and work on your end, especially if you have to collect large amounts. Like John said that it could be 10 at the local level, depending on what city you're running in. But for say a statewide position, that could be hundreds of signatures. And on top of that, say you need 300 signatures to file for candidacy, you'll always want to overshoot on that, because when you submit those signatures, they cross-reference those and they might toss them out. They might say that some are illegible or they can't read it. And so you always have to overshoot on the amount that you submit. And to me, like I'm very risk averse. I don't want to leave the ability for me to file for candidacy up to the fact that maybe too many signatures get thrown out for some reason in a really weird year. And so if folks have the capacity to, I highly recommend filing through fee, but there are definitely advantages to filing through petition with signatures. Like John said, if they're tightened signatures, that's fairly doable. You can submit 30 just to be safe and then be on your way. Another argument I've heard about filing through signatures is that that's a really great way to already get your name out in the public, because you're out there with a clipboard, you got volunteers talking, mentioning your name and mentioning what you're running for. That's potential voter contact right then and there. And so pros and cons with that. And I'll let folks decide based on their capacity and how many folks they have helping them, and also what timeline you're operating on. And so that's filing for candidacy. Does anyone have any questions on that or anything that they'd like to share in their personal experiences? John, I really appreciate you mentioning your experience with that.
Oh, for sure.
All right, so moving on. I'm going to talk about endorsements and then fundraising next, because after deciding to run and then filing, I think that endorsements and fundraising are some of the most overwhelming things that people turn towards next as next steps. Because obviously, like, field is when you start to get a few months out from the election day, because you want it fresh in everyone's mind. But endorsements and fundraising are usually what people turn to next immediately. And there's a very important thing to understand about endorsements and fundraising. And my personal take on them is that primary day is in May. Before you even get close to that, there's something that happens that Ben and I have called before the secret primary, or the inside track primary. And what that is essentially is people scrambling for internal and institutional support. And the way that usually comes is through endorsements and then fundraising. Endorsements because it is a projection of public and social strength, and then fundraising and building out your political action committee's funds because that shows your financial capabilities and strength. going into that upcoming election. So let's talk about endorsements first. There are two types of endorsements that are going to be very important to you. There are going to be endorsements from individuals and endorsements from organizations. And whether they're from individuals or organizations, the first thing you need to know is that on the Secretary of State website, there is a form that you can find through the search bar. It is called the SEL 400 form. Are people familiar with that? Nod your head if you've already seen those. Okay, cool. Those are the ones that you need to get signed, and you need to perfect those to a T in terms of the accuracy of information on there. For those of you who are going to be viewing this in the future, this form is how you get an individual on your voter pamphlet statement officially. So someone can give you their endorsement and say, hey, you can throw me up on a social media graphic, put me on an ad, whatever. They can give you permission to do that. But to be officially on your voter pamphlet statement that goes to everyone's mailboxes before they get their ballots, you need to make sure that that organization or individual has signed an SEL 400 form for you, and that you've submitted that properly in the Secretary of State website or your local elections process, whichever, depending on what position you're running for. But those forms are incredibly important. Now, getting endorsements from individuals. The priorities here should always be elected officials that represent your community first and foremost. Those are the ones that are going to be high priority and that other people who are running for that position will be competing for. So say, let's use Rep. Graber's race, for example, again. Our priorities in that race were to secure Representative Margaret Doherty's endorsement, to secure Mayor Jason Snyder's endorsement, and some of the city councilors in Tigard City Council, to meet with the Tigard Tualatin school board members and see if they were interested and invested in endorsing. What will convey the most strength to people who vote, especially in primary elections, because these are usually the ones who are more politically inclined, they're following the political climate in the area and are most likely to be more familiar with local electeds. That's your voter base that you're targeting. So you want to make sure that you're getting names that are familiar locally to them and that represent your area. Now, it does not hurt to go get elected officials from other cities or other districts. You know, those are validators, and those people might have a special meaning or relationship to you, or might share the same like identity as you. Those are great as well, and you should have those. But the priority should always be the ones who are within your constituency, the ones that represent you in your district, first and foremost. And those meetings and that process can be as simple as shooting them an email and letting them know that, hey, I'm running for office, and I would love your endorsement. I'm open to meeting. They'll usually want to meet first and have a conversation with you, and it's usually a personal interaction from there. Some people have gone endorsements on the spot after one meeting. Some have said, hold on, we'll get back to you. I want to do my due diligence and either do some research on you or research all the people who are running for that position. So that's individual endorsements. I'm sure I'm missing a bunch there, but that's the Spark Notes version of that. John, did you have something that you want to chime in on?
Yeah, I was just going to add, just for clarification. So for the city of Beaverton, I would guess other localities for local elections, we don't use the SEL 400 form. And more for the benefit of the recording and for future candidates, there's something called the joint county, Kevin, what is it called? Joint voter statement, joint county something.
Something like that. I don't remember.
Yeah, it's let me pull it up. It's a joint JVCO2 is what it's called, and it's joint county voters pamphlet form. And I believe it's Multnomah, Washington, and Clackamas County local elections. So if you're running for county or city office, they want that for your voter pamphlet if you have an endorsement. So that's the only thing I learned that the hard way last time when I got like I forgot how many endorsements I had, but they were all on the SEL 400s because that's what makes sense. And if you read the state site, that's what they want. And then the county told me to go get the other ones. And luckily I turned it in and, far enough in advance that I had time to go back and do all that. But it was just an important lesson I learned.
What's that called again?
It's the Joint County Voters Pamphlet. If you just Google that, you'll be able to find it pretty quickly. And depending on the jurisdiction, the city of Beaverton put together a candidate's handbook for all of its candidates, and it kind of outlines. There's one version of the form there, but you can print out like however many you need.
Thank you very much, John, for mentioning that. For the sake of the recording and for you all attending live, I want to make sure that all of our information is relevant to the various positions that folks are running for. So I hope everyone on the recording has noted that there are different forms for local and county races. Thank you.
For sure.
Anything else on individuals meeting with electeds, that process? Okay, I'll move on to organizations real quick.
That's the only thing I would add,
Oh,
just because this was helpful to me both times, is I looked at the social media accounts of everyone who had ran for Beaverton City Council for the last like 4 or 5 elections. And I would recommend people do that to see the people that are actively endorsing in those races and the organizations that are actively endorsing, because it kind of gives you an idea, like if they've played historically in this sandbox, they might play again. And that kind of help you triage who to talk to first and things like that, for if people are like, oh, there's so many there's hundreds of elected people who, who should I do beyond just the people, to your point earlier, that are running or they're already existing on the board that you're running for, you can kind of see who played in that area before.
Absolutely. Either on their Facebook pages or their campaign websites. That's another great place to look. So that way you have a starting point outside of local folks around you. One more point that I just thought of as John made that comment is that this is a very daunting process. It can be to speak to electeds or other community leaders. And I've found that some folks have found it fairly easy that if you're close with one individual or even a community leader, it doesn't need to be an elected official who has a working relationship or friendship with these folks that you need to get meetings with and get their endorsements, have them make an intro for you, have them be a liaison. That can take some of the edge off of setting up these meetings and can help ease you into the endorsement process with electeds and community leaders.
Justin, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, of course.
So regarding endorsements, I've gotten a good number of initial endorsements that I'm really happy with so far. There are also people who have played in the political game before and have endorsed people, and they're not people whose endorsements I particularly want. I just don't want them to endorse my opponent. Do you have a strategy for for that? Curious for your perspective.
Yes, so that is a great question, Kevin, and one that I know others have definitely faced, and my former employers have faced before as well. There are 2 ways that you could approach this. The first is that you could accept their endorsement, but you don't need to post it anywhere. You don't need to, when someone gives you an endorsement, and here for the recording as well, you are not obligated to include that individual in your voter pamphlet statement. I'll repeat that again. You're not obligated to include every endorsement that you get on the voter pamphlet statement. Now you can, and it shows a projection of strength, but if you're running in a partisan race, especially for those folks, of course you want to tailor your voter pamphlet statement to the voters in your party. So one strategy can be working for the endorsement of those folks, still staying true to your platform and your base, but say if that individual is still interested in endorsing you, by all means, accept it. And then you don't even necessarily need to put it out on social media. You can just make sure that you have that locked down so that way they do not go and interview your opponent and endorse your opponent, even at that. The other way that I've seen folks navigate this, and this is a little more tricky, is getting that individual or organization to neutral. Basically making a great argument and case for yourself as to maybe where you share some overlap in that person's values, especially if they're from the opposite party or represent opposing interests that don't really match with your policy platform. But you could get it to the point where they realize that you're reasonable, logical, and very well-organized candidate. And for them, they don't want to pick a losing horse. So you've made such a compelling argument that they're going to stay neutral in the race. So those are the two ways that you could approach it. Was that helpful, Kevin?
That's good. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. Any other questions? Those last two were really great. Does anyone else have anything else that they want to ask about regarding endorsements? Oh, what's your take on dual endorsements? That's interesting. Because that technically falls on the person who is actually doing the endorsing. My take on folks that dual endorse is that it's kind of the same effect as like being neutral, except maybe they've already promised one individual their public endorsement, but then another, the opponent came along the way and they realize, oh shoot, like I support them too. When I've seen community leaders and elected officials dual endorse, that's as far as they usually go. Maybe they'll make a donation of equal amounts to each candidate, but for the most part, once the dual endorsement has been made, they usually take that opportunity to kind of bow out and take a hands-off approach. But from the candidate perspective, I've always been really bummed when I see dual endorsements, working as a staffer on a campaign, because that, again, is basically neutral. That is getting to what Kevin's point of, if you see an opponent get endorsed by someone, and then you can go to that elected official or community leader or organization and get them to endorse you too, you have effectively neutralized that endorsement, in my opinion, especially if that name ends up popping up on the voter pamphlet statement for both candidates. Because then at that point, the voter is going to be like, well, I see Representative so-and-so over here, but then they're also on supporting this candidate. I'm confused. So that's my take on dual endorsements, Andres. Thank you for that question. Anything else?
Justin, do you have an opinion on rolling them out, right? What's an effective strategy? Because, say I have like 10 or 15 now, I want to give them their own moment in the spotlight and kind of, my plan, tell me if this is wrong or if you have a different opinion, is like maybe once or twice a week, putting names out there and getting on social media and kind of building momentum and show, keeping your name in the names people are familiar with. So their current elected people out in front of eyeballs, right, on social media and things like that. Or do you think it's better to hold them all until a certain time, or like group all the groups together? Like, if labor, if you have a number of unions, should it be like Beaverton labor supports, and then just, I don't know, any thoughts there on like kind of a rollout strategy?
John, that's a phenomenal question. And for you all and for the recording, I'll say that there's no cookie cutter answer, because folks usually develop a strategy on rolling out endorsements based on what type of race they're in. For example, if you know that you're uncontested and you're focused on making sure that no one jumps in, I am a proponent of the shock and awe rollout, where you just have a huge list of supporters that you've already culled together, because no one else is in the race yet. You haven't approached the filing deadline, but as far as no one else is interested. I would do my best to project strength by having a large list and putting that out there for everyone to see. Doesn't even necessarily need to be rolled out over multiple days, but you can do that. You can still accomplish shock and awe over multiple days. But my priority would be get as many out there as possible. If you are running a contested race and you're trying to stay ahead of your opponent, but also try to use endorsements as a way to garner public support, get attention on your profile on social media or your campaign website, I would do more of a strategic rollout. No one wants to encounter social media burnout or a campaign burnout where they're putting one out every day and you're starting to realize that it's not getting as much traction on social media. There's not as many likes or eyes getting on it. I would space it out to where I'm rolling out maybe 2 to 3 a week. And I would always start out with the heavy hitting ones, because that makes it known to folks that you've secured someone big, you've secured someone who has really strong name recognition, either on the local or statewide level. And I want that to be known immediately, because that also serves as a validator when going to other community leaders and elected officials saying, hey, look, I got former Governor Roberts to endorse me. I would really be honored if you could throw your support behind my campaign as well. And, you know, if I can imagine if an elected sees, say, like former Governor Barbara Roberts behind you, that will turn their head. Maybe not automatically give their endorsement. No, by all means, they have their own processes, but that will turn their heads and make them realize, okay, this person isn't playing around. They've done their due diligence, and I will take them very seriously when we have a conversation about endorsement. So for a contested one, I always recommend a very strategic rollout, starting with your heavy hitting endorsements, and then you're working your way through community leaders, local electeds. That's what will get people engaged throughout the entire campaign cycle, from start to primary, and then primary to general. Another thing that I recommend for competitive elections is seek endorsements where you wouldn't think that you need to go. You know, there are people who pay really close attention now, especially after the pandemic, to their schools, especially the organizations that revolve around their kids. So teachers unions, even the PTA president, or whatever the parent-teacher association is called now, like those are validators in their own sense as well. So don't underestimate community leaders when you fight for endorsements. Any other questions? Sorry, that was a really long-winded answer to that, and I hope I answered that to your liking.
That was super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Real quick, gosh, this is going by a lot faster than I anticipated. Diane, I thought we were gonna have a robust time for like Q&A at the end, but it looks like I'm gonna cut this close. The last thing I want to mention, and it's about organization endorsements real quick. This is a Democratic WashCo County meeting, so I'm gonna say it here, like the groups that you want are labor groups, conservation groups, gun rights groups like Every Town and Moms Demand Action. Here, I'll give examples for the conservation. It's like OLCV and Sierra Club for conservation groups. The major labor groups are AFL-CIO Oregon, SEIU, UFCW, PCOON, and a whole other list that is, trust me, that is non-exhaustive. There's so many labor groups and organizations, and it's wonderful because it means that, you know, folks are being unionized and they're getting really engaged in politics here. Abortion access groups like Planned Parenthood and NARAL Network of Oregon. Those two are very important. If anyone identifies as LGBTQIA+ or BIPOC, any culturally based advocacy groups are really great to have under your belt, and they'll probably reach out to you before you even know about them. Youth advocacy groups, I know there's Stand for Children, and then also Next Step Action Fund. And they usually take a broad look at a lot of races, both statewide and local. And then also with labor groups, please do not forget to check in on your teachers, your teacher association in your local school district, because those folks are phenomenal people. I've had great experiences with education association leaders, and they are usually some of the most engaged and eager volunteers I've experienced in terms of recruiting them for canvassing. So knocking on doors or dropping literature. And they're wonderful to get a good pulse on your community because they fall at the intersection of interacting with government folks, parents, and students. So definitely hit up your teachers as well. What that process looks like for organizations is you'll usually reach out to, you'll go on their website and you'll look for their government relations person, political director, or policy director. That's usually your point of contact as a candidate. And you'll mention that you're running for such and such position and that you're interested in participating in their endorsement process. You're going to want to do this, say for the primary, you're going to want to be making these contacts in December and January at the latest, because these processes start quick. And I don't have a full calendar. I don't think anyone has a consolidated calendar of all the different processes that all these different groups go through, but they usually start around early to mid-January, some of them as early as that. So the earlier that you can start reaching out to these folks, the better in terms of securing their endorsement. They will send you a questionnaire. You will fill that out by a specified deadline. And it's usually related to policies that that group is passionate and interested about. Some of these can be very, very lengthy. I will warn you in advance. Then if they accept your questionnaire, they will usually schedule you for an interview. And that is usually before an endorsement board for that organization. They will ask you questions about the responses you gave in the questionnaire. And then they will interview you, hear your stump, and learn more about you. And if they like you and all goes well, you'll get an endorsement. These organization endorsement processes are very important as well, because they also serve as validators for people's policy priorities. Especially, you can imagine in Oregon, something like OLCV or Planned Parenthood. Those are big, big validators as a Democratic candidate and as a progressive candidate. But also, in addition to having their name and their support, they will potentially support you in the campaign process, either financially by sending you a campaign contribution to your PAC, and or they'll provide in-kind services. In-kind services, for those of you who don't know, it's just basically paid for services on their behalf. So that could take the form of paid canvassers, paid phone bankers, printing off literature, or doing a campaign swag for you, like buttons or yard signs. And so the endorsement process is tedious, especially with how long the questionnaires are. In my personal opinion, it's not very worker friendly, because as a person who probably has a day job and then running a campaign, I can imagine you're already very stressed. These questionnaires can take hours. But I will give you some hope in knowing that the investment that you put into organization endorsement processes pays off through the fact that they will give you either a check for hard cash or services that help you throughout the campaign. I realize
Justin,
yes.
There's a question in the chat about the effectiveness of the lit drop versus mailer pieces.
That's a very good question. Hi, is that how you pronounce it? Or hey?
Yes, that's correct.
Oh.
Hi.
Hi. Oh, thank you for that question. That's very interesting, because I'm trying to recall how we did it. You know, I ran a campaign at the very beginning of the pandemic when we weren't even doing literature drops because we were so scared and worried. This was back in 2020. And so I am actually not attuned to what the current conversation is in terms of what's more effective and what's not. But here's what I'll say in terms of what I would prefer. if you can do as many literature drops as possible, I would prioritize that over shifting from literature drops and focusing all your money and time in mailer pieces. Both are very important, but here's the difference between a literature drop and a mailer piece. And there's only one important difference, and that's you're paying for postage on mailer pieces. So that's gonna bite you in terms of your campaign budget right then and there. Literature drops are essentially mailer pieces, just without the cost of postage. At the end of the day, to be quite honest, and I'm sure all of you have been guilty of this at some point, most of these pieces get a quick glance over, maybe 5 seconds on each side. And if you're a Politico, it might go in your pile that you're saving to review with your voter pamphlet statement. But if you're the average Jane Doe, Joe Smith voter, it's probably going to go in the recycling or trash. And that's the harsh reality of literature and mailer pieces. But I hope that's helpful in understanding how you can strategize between how much you put into lit drops and how much you put into mailer pieces. Gosh, Diane, we could do a whole section on mailers, and I realize that there's no section in here about this, but there's good strategy in regards to mailer pieces that I could talk your ears off for days. And that's also related to who you're targeting in your voter universe. But I think we'll need a 2.0 for that. But thank you for that question. Hi. Anything on organization endorsements? Or, you know, we can throw the script out of here. If you've got a question about literature drops or mailers too, I'm happy to talk about that now as well.
I was gonna just make a quick point that I found pretty effective, and it kind of ties in with the last question around pandemic, mail drops versus lit drops. There's a lot of progressive campaigns that are running for, state rep and city council and county commission, and we're all targeting the same votes. So what I found pretty effective is, like, in addition to asking for people's endorsements, is like, hey, I'm a progressive, you're a progressive, we're looking for the same voters. In areas where our territories overlap, I'll take some of your lit and drop it off if you take some of mine, right? And it starts to build that relationship. And you're also like, our volunteers are going to hit thousands of doors, and if there's another pool with access to our literature that's helping, you're only helping get your word out, and you're building from candidate to candidate or campaign to campaign. You're building trust and relationships, because you're going to have to meet these people and collect their literature, give them yours, and chat. And I think it kind of helps a little bit with the endorsement too, right? You're building the relationships and just spending time together, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. I know Ben definitely did that with the firefighters back when he was running for Tiger Tarleton School Board. On that same point that John just mentioned, another thing that you could potentially put together, especially if the other individual is comfortable with it. And unfortunately, I think this will happen more often than not for folks who are running uncontested versus someone who is contested, is that electeds from time to time have done joint literature and joint mail pieces where they appear together. And those are phenomenal, because not only do you have their name on your voter pamphlet statement and then on your website, but then you have your photo together on a mailer that's going to voters that are very familiar with the incumbent, say like a state rep that you teamed up with, and then you as a first-time candidate have your photo next to them. And that is such a strong validator. And those are I've seen some great mailers and lit drops done with those. Those are uncommon, just because usually races are pretty contested nowadays. But I have seen folks who, like, they have a really close relationship with the mayor, a really close relationship with their state rep, who have felt comfortable in doing so. So I wouldn't discount those opportunities, but I would definitely float those if you ever have someone who endorsed you that you have a really tight relationship with. And it can save costs too. We are at 6:54. So at this point, I kind of just want to open it up. I did not get to touch on the topics of building your network, fundraising, or preparing field. So I will throw it to you all in terms of what you would like to hear about that you would find most helpful. And I'd be happy to elaborate on whatever questions you have regarding building a network, fundraising, or preparing for field.
Justin, I've got a question.
Yes.
Probably along the lines of preparing for field canvassing. I have a core team of 3 people right now. I expect it to be 4 or 5 total people in that kitchen cabinet. But where I struggle is like a lot of this stuff, I feel like I've got to be doing it personally right now. And like we don't have like a weekly meeting set up yet, but I do think we will have like a weekly check-in on Tuesday nights just to make sure endorsement applications are going okay and start talking about like next steps. But I'm curious if you've got any themes or tips that go along with like the initial setup of the core team and then empowering them to really take on their own leadership roles.
Sure thing. So you could either do this yourself, or if you have the benefit, an opportunity of having a campaign manager, you could task this to them. But the way that I have remember utilizing our kitchen cab, and Diane, you're more than welcome to chime in since you are a kitchen cab veteran on here. But what I found most effective was that, I think maybe the second or third meeting after everyone had established rapport with one another and felt pretty comfortable with just being introduced to you as a candidate and also the campaign, maybe overarching plan, was to start asking folks like what their capacity is. You always want to make sure that you're meeting your kitchen cab members and super volunteers where they are. So I always remember to make a point of asking like, okay, first of all, like, how involved would you like to be? How much capacity do you have? And even like what times of the day are better for you? Some people working from home, some people are doing childcare at home. Like there's so many things that could be impacting their lives. And then meeting them where they are with the tasks that you need done, then asking like, what are they most passionate about or interested in? Either passionate about with campaigning or you as an individual, or what do they feel most comfortable with like volunteering for and doing? And so, for example, Diane Doctor is a legend when it comes to canvassing. And so I knew immediately when I asked her, I was like, what would you like to be doing to help Rep. Graber win this election? And she said, I will knock doors. I will go through my the soles of my shoes like no other and go up and down these hills in Southwest Portland. I was like, wonderful. So then I asked her, what was her capacity per weekend? How much literature I needed to give her, or how much I could expect and count on her to do. And I just met her where she was. And I went from there. If someone doesn't know their capacity and maybe doesn't know their interest, maybe that's when you can start relying on your personal relationship with them and what you know of them. Say if they're a really good writer, they could maybe help you with messaging on social media or putting together copy for a letter to the editor, which is another great campaign strategy, is writing letters to the editor about yourself as a candidate or the policies that you're running on. And so
another thing I'm thinking, Justin, is that some of the candidates, I don't even know how they did this, but they connected with a lot of the students at the local high schools, and they got some incredible campaigners that way. I know Ben did that, and Dacia. I mean, they are a force to be reckoned with if you get some teenagers on your side. I mean, they just go.
They absolutely do. That is another place I'd look to when building a field campaign. I have a caveat with that I'll get to in a moment, but a good amount of high schools in the metro area now, to the best of my knowledge, have some form of a student union nowadays because of how engaged they are with local politics around them and also issues that are impacting their school district. I know TTSD has a very robust student union that has been tapped into and has their own endorsement process now, if you could believe. And so they're phenomenal. And students, they love the opportunity to get to work on something where they feel like they have agency and that they're contributing to change that they're rallying for and always talking to, that no one, that it seems to fall on deaf ears. But when they find a candidate that they're passionate about, they relish the opportunity to find someone who's actually listening to them and will champion what they're calling for. Now, the caveat that I have with recruiting students and utilizing student volunteers is that it can be very lopsided, and it is a very delicate power dynamic that you have there. And just on top of that, utilizing students who are usually under the age of 18 and offering like free time amongst all the other extracurriculars that they do. When folks talk to me, because I work in youth leadership development also in my spare time, one of the things that I always emphasize is that if you're bringing on a super volunteer student that's going to be with you for a good amount of the campaign, not just helping out like once a month on a weekend, offer them an internship. And not only offer them an internship, see if you can arrange for them to be stipend somehow, because that is some serious labor that goes into running a campaign. And I'm a firm believer that if you're having someone do consistent work for you and work that is done well, that they should be compensated in some form or fashion for that. And in addition to that, I have seen candidates approach students in a very tokenizing way, where they're like, well, I just want the youth voice. I want your endorsement to show that I support the youth and students and that I'm representing school issues. It should not be lopsided like that. Like if you're going to a student union or you're going to a group of student leaders and you're convincing them to be invested in your campaign, you should be equally as invested in their future prospects and their personal development as well. And I know that what made Ben's campaign so unique in the way that he worked with students is each one of them, he wrote a letter of recommendation to, and even had meetings with them as groups after the campaigns were done on workshopping how to apply to college, how to write a personal statement, and so forth. Now that's going above and beyond because that's Ben Bowman. And if anyone of you know who Ben Bowman is, you know that checks out for him. But that's just my emphasis on making sure that it's reciprocal in terms of the relationship of utilizing volunteers who honestly work their butts off when they're engaged in the campaign. Yeah. The last bit that I have for you, Kevin, that I think is a phenomenal resource is checking into the systems that are already in place to support candidates that kind of exist in the nooks and crannies of social life. So there are House district groups for the Democrats on Facebook. Diane runs the House district group for HD 35 with Carl Fisher, well, the current iteration of House District 35. And those are packed with politicos who are very localized and focused. And I know that other House districts across the state have those, and they are willing and open to assist in getting in a whole slate of candidates that run in the local area. So say you're running for city council, have no fear, still get involved in the House district Facebook group, and then let people know who you are, introduce yourself, and let them know that you're running for something. Chances are you're gonna find someone who is a super volunteer who gets super engaged during primary and general election season and is looking for campaigns to do lip drops on, or maybe help with phone banking. Other than that, there are PCP groups too, for all the various counties and their parties. There are various advocacy groups like parent advocacy groups that are Democrat or progressive leaning. You can find a whole plethora of groups if you just spend a little time internet sleuthing on Facebook and looking around for politically engaged folks that happen to be local. And you'll be shocked at what you find in terms of how niche these groups can be. But chances are you'll find a handful of diamonds in there. of folks who are just waiting to be tapped on to know who's running and then start getting engaged.